Good morning. I'm the Hazard Mitigation Specialist for Nevada Division of Emergency Management. I welcome you all to today's Hazard Mitigation Training Section number 6. And that will cover BRIC and the FMA and also the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And appreciate the Witt O'Brien team for presenting today. And that would be Matt and Chelsea. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to them now. So if you guys can take it away.
Thanks, Hal, and Happy New Year to everybody. Matt and I are going to sort of pass things back and forth today. We very excitedly, again, Matt, myself, Aaron, who is not with us today, are here to support you all through this wonderful, exciting new opportunity. So Matt and I are going to go back and forth. We're going to introduce you to the BRIC and FMA Notices of Funding Opportunities that dropped on Monday. So this was the annual grant program that we've been kind of preparing you all for. And I'm going to pass it off here to Matt to get us started here with the NOFO.
All right. Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So like Chelsea said, we're here to support you guys in your endeavor of kind of finding funding opportunities for your mitigation projects locally. Like Chelsea said, the Notice of Funding Opportunity for both BRIC and FMA dropped on Monday, the 6th. So we're excited. It's been delayed for the past couple of years, so this is it's good to get this finally out the door. So key dates going over for this Notice of Funding Opportunities for both of them. As soon as it dropped, so on the 6th, that is when the application period opens. So that's when you should be able to access FEMA Go, which is the FEMA grants outcome, which is the platform which you'd be applying for these grants. So that's good that that's available. Other key dates, the deadline for all states to submit their application package is April 18th, but the state deadline is for March 3rd. So that is significant because it gives kind of a month, a little bit more than a month for the state to do their final reviews. They have to make sure everything is good to go and signed off in FEMA Go. They might have their own internal review process to kind of rank their sub-applications to be put into the system in that specific order. So keep in mind that key date is March 3rd for the state's deadline. Looking at available funding, a little bit down from last year. Last year it was $1 billion. This year it's $750 million, so down slightly. The state and tribal set aside remain the same at $2 million. So that's where each state and territory is giving an allocation of $2 million. And that is usually for capability and capacity building activities. That's why I put that little asterisk there. It's because in the NOFO, it says you could use that 2 million state set aside for mitigation projects, but it also states in the NOFO that 1.5 million of that 2 million must be used for C and CB activities. So that's why it's very important for you guys to attend these kind of training seminars, but also take time to look through these NOFOs because there is some not really conflicting language, but it says, $2 million, you can use it for C and CB or mitigation projects. But the caveat is you got to use 1.5 million of that for C and CB activities. The $50 million federal cap for mitigation projects for the nationally competitive pool, that remains the same. With that being said, if you say you want to apply for, say, a $75 million project, that federal cap that is capped at 50 million. So the local share would have to put up the remaining. So you would kind of do that overmatch. Next slide.
Sure, and I'll go over the FMA NOFO. So similar to the BRIC notice of funding opportunity, the deadlines are the same. They're completely two different programs that follow their own procedures, but they try to align them so that there's, just see if I can mute that. Perfect. So they try to align them just for the ease of you all. If you're pursuing one subgrant application that might be eligible under both opportunities, at least you have similar deadlines. The caps are similar to last year, down slightly, but the same. We'll go over the capability and capacity building type projects in just a little bit. They break out the flood-related projects into two different buckets. One is the localized, so like a large-scale community-level mitigation activity, and then the individual, which would be like residential individual sites, so elevation acquisition or the traditional normal individual flood mitigation projects under the FMA grant. So similar deadlines, and we're going to go over exactly what each of these grants are looking for. Go ahead, Matt.
Thanks, Chelsea. So for both programs, eligibility and completeness is always key. You want to make sure that you're an eligible sub-applicant. And the state will obviously help you decipher that, and I'm sure you are if you are on these training sessions. For the proposed activity, it must be eligible according to the HMA policy guidance and policy guide, and also must be eligible in terms of what is specified in this year's notice of funding opportunity. Consistent with actions identified with the approved enhanced state mitigation plan or your local hazard mitigation plan. That is always key. That's why you do these local hazard mitigation plans, is you kind of outline the mitigation strategy, your proposed mitigation actions, and that's all good when you write it on paper, but the object or the objective is to make your community safer from these natural hazards. So that's why these funding opportunities exist, is because you kind of take what you've written into the plan, and now you have a project, and now you apply for that funding to implement that project. And the last one, which is key, is you can't combine federal funding within the HMA realm of grants. Is that it wants to be funded through the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Funding umbrella, which is what we're talking about today, is the BRIC, FMA, and also you've seen in previous training sessions the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and also the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, the post-fire. Those are post-event funding sources. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to go into more of the BRIC program specifically now, and as I'm talking, you guys can kind of read the overview of it. Really hasn't changed from last year, but I want to just set it up for the next several slides. Is I want to go over the evaluation criteria, and this is what FEMA uses to kind of rank and grade not only your project, but your content, your supporting documentation. So I'm just kind of setting the preface of how we're going to kind of go into the next several slides. All right, so you guys have probably seen this. We went over eligible activities before. Just getting a sip of coffee, I'm sorry. So For the capability and capacity building types of activities, you'll see on the far right what is allowed under BRIC, what is not allowed under BRIC, and then vice versa, what is allowed under the FMA grant program and what is not allowed under the FMA program.
Matt, one point I just want to call out, Janelle pointed this to us on Monday. For the first time, BRIC is allowing project scoping in the national competition. So if we're looking at a higher dollar figure budget project scoping, if you want to explore opportunities for mitigation, this is the first time that you can exceed the $2 million threshold that is in the state set aside. So that's the only big change if you've followed BRIC for a few years.
Yeah. Thank you, Chelsea. And I'm not sure if FMA has that same, or is that kind of capped under the same CB for FMA?
I have to double check that.
All right, so next slide. This is what is allowed in terms of your, you're breaking ground, you're beyond the scoping, you're not doing C and CV. You want to actually implement an actual construction project. This is what is eligible under BRIC. You can see it's pretty much, it's everything. But FMA, there's certain things like wildfire, generators, those are not eligible under the flood mitigation systems program. Next slide. All right. So if you guys have followed BRIC for the past several years, the way they do their grading system is they break it apart in two separate, I guess, phases or sections. One is the technical evaluation criteria, which is what you're seeing on your screen right now. That is done by people at FEMA, maybe individuals that are contracted to do these reviews by FEMA. So just so you know that this technical aspect is done by people at FEMA or have been contracted out to do these reviews on their behalf. There are 5 separate evaluation criteria: infrastructure projects, incorporation of nature-based solutions. There's a building code component. There is the direct technical assistance or advanced, or not advanced, it could be advanced assistance or project scoping. And then one on the far right is the Justice 40 or the disadvantaged communities. And I'll go through each of them here in a minute. All right, so the first one is is it an infrastructure project? Explain how the project mitigates the risk to critical facilities, structures, stuff like that. Something that's going to provide protection to entire community, population, economy, all that. So you want to include. Thank you. So you want to include that in your scope of work. You get a max points of 15 for this. So when I say max points, this is not like a grading scale, like maybe with some other the criteria that we'll get into later on. This is kind of like it's an all or nothing. It's either 0 or 15. All right, so the technical evaluation criteria number 2 is does your project incorporate nature-based solutions, right? It's either 5 points or 15 points or 0. You get 5 points if it's like a neighborhood scale, like a smaller type of project, maybe some type of flood control project that's going to protect a neighborhood, or is it going to be like a larger watershed landscape type scale? And that's where you would get either 5 for a smaller infrastructure project, or a smaller nature-based solution project, or 15 if it's going to be a little bit larger.
I have some examples, Matt, just to kind of help tie it in. So like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
neighborhood site scale would be like a bioswale. If you were redoing a roadscape and you included like a little ditch where you'd put native wildflowers or something to help infiltrate the soil, whereas watershed would be um, something like contour felling of the trees with inclusion and native planting all across the entire watershed. Um, Anything that's going to involve planting native materials, utilizing sinuosity of a stream, so like restoring a native or a natural curvature to a channel. Basically, anytime you can plant a tree or utilize like a beaver dam or something, anything that is from the natural environment.
Yeah, thank you, Chelsea. I was kind of struggling for a good example for both, but thank you. Okay. So it's not really new, but for the evaluation criteria number 3, they actually have 2 sections of it. So section 3.1 is, building code adoption and building code enforcement. So building code adoption, you can see right here where you're going to get 5 points if you have locally adopted building codes. You could add another 5 points if it's mandatory if you're you're complying with the statewide building codes. And then BSEG's rating is your building code enforcement grading schedule. That's the enforcement piece. So if you have a BSEG's rating 1 to 5, you get 10 points there. And then the alternative higher standards. So say you didn't get like 5 points for the top 3, 5, or 10. You could get 5 points if you didn't apply or didn't get anything above that. You have alternative higher standards. You just have to put like something in a narrative that says why your localized standards are above the standards that are set forth by your local or your state. And for those alternative higher standards, you can see some examples below, requiring at least 2 feet of freeboard in the special flood hazard area, etc. These examples are listed in the NOFO. I just put a couple in there just to show you what some examples are for the alternative higher standards. All right, so technical evaluation number 4, you get 10 points if, say, the project that you're applying for this year, construction project, say it was the planning or the design was previously awarded as an advanced assistance or a project scoping award. They give you those 10 points because FEMA likes to see the money that they put forth to design or kind of scope out a project. Now they're going to see that, hey, now this sub-applicant is applying for, the construction piece of it. So they kind of give you a little incentive or a little extra points to show you that you just didn't design a project, scope it, and then just put it on a book and a shelf, right? They're giving you some points because now you want to make it ready, right? Construction ready, you're ready to break ground, ready to go. If that is the case, and this applies for you or applies to you, the NOFO states that you should just attach the PDF of the previous award package to your sub-application in FEMA Go. Next slide. And then the last of the technical evaluation criteria is what's the project's benefiting area, right? 30 points. You get 30 points if your project is benefiting a community that is defined as disadvantaged by the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, which it is hyperlinked here. We've talked about this in previous trainings. So if it is a disadvantaged community that your project is protecting, or your project's location is within this area, then you'll get 30 points for that. But you could also get 40 points if it is designated as economically disadvantaged rural community, or in a community disaster resilience zone. So we've talked about this previous trainings too, but I have the hyperlink in there. And then you get a max of 40 points if it is both Justice 40 and in a community disaster resilience zone. So that's good to keep in mind. Of your project area, who's it going to benefit, and how FEMA sees your project in benefiting the local community. And that is it for the 5 technical evaluation criteria. Now I'm going to go into the 6 qualitative evaluation criteria. About that. So this review is done by a national review panel. So FEMA convenes this national review panel. It's all volunteers, they're not getting paid for it. And they're just given like a batch of sub applications to review. They'll be potentially in a group setting, so they can compare notes. But this is how FEMA gets people involved in the review process, right? Because nobody just wants everything to be reviewed by FEMA and FEMA's, in their eyes. But this is an opportunity for, local emergency managers, anybody who you can volunteer and get selected can review projects from across the country. So like I said, there's 6 risk. Reduction is one of them. How does your project address climate change and other future conditions? Implementation measures, the population impacted by this mitigation project, partnerships, and community engagement.
Matt, I wanted to make one point on this really quick, just that in other training programs where we've talked through telling your story, this is where telling your story is the make or break. Because to Matt's point, Janelle, actually, our state hazard mitigation officer, has sat on that qualitative review panel every year since the inaugural in 2020. And she sits on that panel with representatives from other federal agencies, other state and local representatives. So these are people, and particularly they like to have people from the East Coast review West Coast applications and West Coast review East Coast applications. So these are people who have never seen your neighborhood and have no idea what you're facing. If you want to be selected, you have to tell your story in the most effective and direct and complete manner possible.
Yeah, Chelsea's right. These people that could be reviewing your mitigation project maybe have never been to Nevada, maybe have never been to the West Coast. You want to tell that story as descriptive as you can. Paint the picture. All right, so qualitative evaluation criteria number 1. How well is your project going to reduce risk? How well is it going to increase resilience within your community? Are there any other ancillary benefits? This is where you're starting the story. You're laying it out for the reviewer. What you want to do, how is it going to impact and protect the community that the project's located in. So this is definitely key. Get 30 points for this one. Yeah, thanks, Chelsea. qualitative evaluation criteria number 2. How well does your project address climate change and other future conditions? So before I hit on this one, can you back it up one real quick, Chelsea? All right, so in the NOFO, and it tells you in this, under this qualitative evaluation criteria, it tells you to put this in the scope of work. So it says the scope of work should clearly detail, and then you kind of define these right here. So if you go to the next slide, this number 2, it says in the NOFO, it says in the evaluation section, you should clearly describe this. So it's telling you, you know, in the NOFO, FEMA is telling you you're going to get points for this, and if you clearly answer these questions, but it also tells you where to put it in your sub application. It'll either be in the scope of work or the evaluation section. And those will be in FEMA Go. You'll have an evaluation section. So in the evaluation section for this one, you know, identify the climate change risks that you're addressing, and how your project will respond to the effects of climate change, future conditions. You know, it's not limited to just population, demographics, land use, you know, stuff like that. And number 4, which is always important, is cite your data sources. Where are you getting this information? You know, there's plenty of climate resources out there that you can do some research on. And if you have some data that you got from there, then make sure you cite where you got it. Or, you know, PDF it and attach it to your FEMA Go sub-application. Next slide. So qualitative evaluation criteria, number 3, implementation measures. And this is 15 points. And then this tells you, you know, from the NOFO that you should put this in your scope of work. How are you going to implement this project? You know, we might have discussed this on previous training sessions, but if not, it's definitely in the notice of funding opportunity. They talk about it a lot. They talk about go and no-go milestones. So that's like in your schedule, like, you know, how are you going to implement this project? What are some key no-go milestones? You know, do you have to do this project? Do you have to get certain aspects or certain tasks done, say before, you know, the bad weather or the monsoon season? You know, stuff like that. Who will implement it? Are there any innovative techniques that you're incorporating into the actual completion of this project? Again, lay all this stuff out in your scope of work. You know, are you going to procure experts to help you, you know, with the implementation project? Next slide. Number 4, qualitative evaluation criteria number 4, the population that is impacted by this project. Again, put this in your scope of work. Provide any community-wide benefits. What proportion of the population will be impacted by this project? How this project was selected or designed to maximize those benefits. Describe how the project's impacts will minimize burdens to disadvantaged communities in your area, if there are any.
So I just want to add, in the technical review criteria, you get points for just attaching the map that shows that you're in that area. This is where telling the story of how this project is going to directly benefit those populations is important. And you'll also see this in the next criteria as well. You're not just describing that this is one thing in the room or in the neighborhood as these people, but how it's going to benefit their lives, how they contributed to it, how you're going to do outreach and education to them. Anything else you wanted to hit on with this slide? I'm going to hit to the next one if I could.
Yeah, the next one just goes right into how you engage the community. Did you have any outreach strategies or support activities that show like that you got the community involved with finding the best solution to help protect them from these natural hazards within their area? Was there any community planning process that you guys have used? Did you have did you seek input from a diverse range of stakeholders to include disadvantaged communities? How community planning and partner input would did it help you choose to do that this project was the best solution to the risk in that area? And it was just 5 points for that one. This is number 6, leveraging partners, which is also 5 points. This one you says right here, the evaluation section should clearly describe how the project will, partnerships. It doesn't have to be community. It's good to have community partnerships, obviously, but leveraging partners from maybe other local organizations. So if you're like picture county emergency management office, they shouldn't be the sole one that just kind of develops a project, right? You should reach out to your transportation section, say if your project's going to impact transportation, or your local or state floodplain manager if it's going to affect the floodplain. Those types of partnerships. It doesn't just have to be, we had a community meeting or we attended this. Like how did you leverage partnerships? Explain those in the evaluation section within your story that you're trying to tell to the reviewer that needs a good kind of story to review.
I will say over the years, BRIC has gotten a little bit more restrictive about the types of eligible applicants. So like your quasi-governmental entities, you're typically going to have to partner with your local government, county, city, in order to get that project across the finish line. So this is a great opportunity if you are a quasi-governmental entity to make that friend at your county emergency management level and document your participation together as a team to get things across the finish line. And I will also say all of these points, they may feel like extra fluff, but typically the projects that are awarded need to score perfectly or near perfectly. So if it takes the extra half an hour to just try and write out that paragraph about the meeting you had a year and a half ago, or all right, I guess we can have a couple extra community meetings and throw that into your scope of work with the budget that aligns with it, it is worth it to get those points and get it across the finish line.
And it's also good.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Chelsea.
I was going to say this is the last slide on the BRIC program, so I'm going to go to FMA unless you wanted to say anything, and then you started saying something. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so these technical evaluation criteria and the qualitative, they've been there since the start, since this BRIC program has come out. Once it morphed into from pre-disaster mitigation to this BRIC program, they've always had the technical and the qualitative criteria. They might have changed a little bit over year after year, but they're pretty much the same. The point systems might change, but the actual component and the elements that the reviewers are going to look for pretty much remain the same. So if you're not interested in pursuing a BRIC project this year, take these 11 criteria, right? 5 for technical, 6 for qualitative. And if you want to apply next year, keep these in your mind as you're planning or preparing for the next grant cycle next year. Schedule meetings, take notes, get minutes, engage your community. It's really just going to benefit. It's going to benefit the overall community in the long run if this project gets funded and implemented. And I think that's it for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Okay, I'm going to jump over to FMA, the Flood Mitigation Assistance. This one is not as fun as the BRIC or as popular, and that is for one very simple reason, which is that it is a program designed to assist the National Flood Insurance Program in removing properties from the floodplain that are currently in the special flood hazard area, specifically properties that are repetitive loss or severe repetitive loss. I don't know if anybody on here is a certified floodplain manager or deals in floodplain in your areas, but basically, I would not consider looking further into FMA unless you have one, NFIP insured properties that you know are getting hit time and time and time again. One other nuance I want to hit up for FMA is that there is a slightly different definition between the National Flood Insurance Program's definition of repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss, or the FMA grant's definition of repetitive loss or severe repetitive loss. But both of those things, think National Flood Insurance Program insured structure, and there's a specific definition for a repetitively lost claimed property and a severe repetitive loss property. So under FMA, there are 3 types of projects, and I needed a minute to think about it, Matt, but project scoping does fall under the capability and capacity building type project under FMA. There is a $900,000 limit for project scoping. And again, we're thinking project scoping for projects that directly impact NFIP insured structures. It's not just general flooding. It's not just flooding in any place, but whenever you submit an application under whenever you submit an application under FMA, you have to specifically identify the structures, the NFIP'd insured structures that project benefits. So for capability and capacity building type projects under FMA, you get 6 points if the area is a Justice 40 community. You get 8 points if it's a CEDAR zone, that's Community Disaster Resilience Zone. Again, kind of similar to what Matt was just talking about. Repetitive loss, substantial damage procedures. This is like way into the weeds on FMA, but if we have questions about substantial damage, I'd be happy to answer that question. But if the property, let's go over it right now. If you have a structure that is damaged for any reason up to 50%, so basically like if you total your car, you lose the value of the car. It's more cost effective to just buy a new car than to repair that vehicle. Substantial damage for properties is similar. If you damage a structure up to 50% of that structure's value, this substantial damage procedure says that you have to build back to code. You can't just put it back the way it was. So if your application is addressing substantially damaged properties and you have a procedure to affect that, then you have 5 points. Community rating system participation. If your community has higher building standards in relation to the NFIP, if you were enrolled in the community rating system, you get an additional 3 points. If you were in partnership with your cooperating technical partner, you get an additional 3 points. And public-private sector partnerships, again, an additional 2 points. All of these capability and capacity type projects, every single one is in competition. So there is a requirement that your capability and capacity building type project also show that you are meeting the expectations of the NOFO, not just the quote unquote national competition projects that we talked about under BRIC. Like I said, there's 2 different types of projects under FMA. There are localized, so like large scale, think detention basins and bridges and culverts and like big community level flood mitigation projects. And then there's the individual home type projects, the individual flood mitigation projects. So in localized flood risk reduction projects, again, if you're working in an area, you still have to identify exactly the number and type of NFIP insured properties. And you have to say how many of those are repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss insured properties. I will also say if you have NFIP insured properties that were repetitive loss or severe repetitive loss and they dropped their coverage, they are no longer insured, not eligible for this grant. Again, FMA thinks specifically towards NFIP. So if you're in a Justice 40 community, 200 points. If you're in a Cedar Zone, 300 points. For every NFIP policy in your project area, you get 2 points up to 200. You get 5 points for every repetitive loss and 10 points for every severe repetitive loss up to 175 points. So that's why it's really important if you're doing a localized flood risk reduction project, you know exactly how many NFIP policies, exactly how many meet the RL and how many meet the SRL definitions. If your project considers climate change and other future conditions, 100 points. Incorporation nature-based solutions, 100 points. If you're incorporating inside of your project, if part of this construction project also includes a capability and capacity building type project, you get an additional points. They want you to do a big, broad scope type, big idea project. If you're including public and private sector partnerships, let's say your project is benefiting the storage unit facility down the road, or Walmart has a stake, or some other private entity in the area is interested in coming to your meetings and putting an input or donating something, that also will get you extra points. If your community is part of the community rating system, that's CRS, if you're looking at higher building standards, you will get extra points. And again, if you're working with your cooperating technical partner program, then you also get extra points. For the smaller level projects, for the individual flood mitigation, this again is like working on an NFIP insured structure. You get 10 points for every substantial damage structure that you are mitigating. So that's substantial damage. That's like, okay, we've totaled our car, we've substantially damaged our property. That's how you should think about it. If you're meeting that definition, the 50% rule, if that property has been damaged up to 50% or more of its value, and you're going to mitigate that structure, you get 10%. 10 points with no cap. You could just rack up as many substantial damage properties that you're mitigating as possible. 35 points for the Justice 40 community, 50 points for the Cedar Zone. And then again, if you're doing an individual flood mitigation, individual structures, it doesn't have to be just one, by the way. If you're pursuing individual flood mitigation, it's more less hassle if you bundle them all together in a single project, as long as it makes sense to do so. And then again, for each of those, let's say you have 100 properties on your individual flood mitigation list. If more than 35% of those properties are repetitive loss or severe repetitive loss, you get 30 points. And if less, 25 to 30, then you get the 15 points. But they really want to help those. This entire program is designed to mitigate repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss, and then also help out any other NFIP insured properties. Any questions on FMA? Okay. Told you we were going to go that quick. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, can you go back one slide?
Absolutely.
And I'll just ask because, I'm sure the question is out there in the audience, but so if you're doing either one of these projects, how do you confirm or how do you gather the data for NFIP policyholders within your project area?
Excellent question. That is an excellent question. So over the last few years, FEMA has gotten more restrictive about the availability of that data. I know some states have a repository of that, but typically nationwide, what we have to do is each community that is an NFIP participating community, so anywhere where there's special blood hazard area, has to submit a letter to FEMA asking for access to that data. Each community does. We have a standard template that we can help share with you if you want to see what that letter looks like, and we can help you identify who that FEMA point of contact is. Once that letter goes up to the FEMA regional representative, they will return a data sharing agreement where you have to sign off each individual person who's going to look at that list. Then they send you a locked Excel spreadsheet where you can access that. You can authorize like contractors or the state to look at that list, or only the people that your floodplain administrator or somebody else at your community. But you have to identify every single person who's going to have access to that list. And then when you get it, you can see the list, and it'll also have a little button. You'll see how many flood NFIP insured properties there are. You'll see whether they qualify as NFIP RLSRL or FMA RLSRL. You can see how many claims have been filed. It'll give you as much information as you want. And in that data sharing agreement, you can click a little button that says, I'm going to use this for grant application purposes. And you just click that button, and then you can use that data for your application. It is a process. So if you're even just curious to see, most communities who go through a hazard mitigation plan update will need to request that information as part of their hazard mitigation planning process. So if you've gone through that recently, you might already have that data out on hand. But if it's been more than a couple years, or if you know you've had a flood incident between the last time you requested that data and now, it's great to request that spreadsheet again to get a good idea. Great question, Matt.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next steps. Matt, I'll let you chime in if I miss anything here, but I'll just keep it going. First things first, Matt and I definitely suggest you get registered in FEMA Go. We've had conversations about signature authority before, maybe haven't been quite as explicit on these training sessions, but when you get into this FEMA Go system, there is certain roles that can be assigned. And there's a role for the project manager type person, the person who's going to be entering all the data, making sure everything's aligned, writing the application. And then there's also a role for the person who is the authorized representative for your organization, who's able to sign those federal documents, legally and fiscally committing your community to an agreement with FEMA, and that person also needs to have a login. So getting this login set up, getting into FEMA Go, being able to see the application and look at all the questions that are going to be asked of you. Definitely get yourself registered in FEMA Go, and consider also getting your authorized subrecipient authorized organizational representatives. I think it's called a SAR, SAOR. In FEMA Go. That's going to be a big step, just because you don't want to be doing that in March. You don't want to be doing that when we get closer to the deadline. Look through these notices of funding opportunities. I will warn you, the BRIC NOFO is 81 pages, but it's a good idea to sort of just read through some of the sections. You can definitely do like Control F if you want to only find certain keywords and read those sections. But again, contact either the state or Matt or myself if you're interested in pursuing BRIC and you just want to talk it through and kind of have like a little workshopping session, talk about if this is a good idea, if it's a good fit, if you should spend your time working on it. We are here to help you if you're curious and you don't really know where to go. And then also please do remember that we want to get those applications completed and in for state review by March 3rd. The state needs enough time to go through their review process, their scoring criteria. They want to make sure that they're allocating funds appropriately before they submit them off. The state has to package all of the subgrants that are associated with these grants into a formal ranked package and submit them all at the same time. So there are additional state level process steps for the grant application in order for the state to make sure that your sub-application is eligible as part of the grant package. As a reminder, these are the things that we looked at today. Eligibility and completeness is a key factor. So that's why we're saying go back and read the NOFO. We talked through the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant, BRIC, Flood Mitigation Assistance, FMA. We went through some of those. I'm just realizing, did we talk through, I think I might have lost a slide in here about management costs in my reorganization earlier. Apologies.
That's fine.
Let me just mention too, we've talked about management costs. For anyone who remembers those sort of pie charts that we had in the guidance decks. So management cost is the award that goes on top of, outside the 75-25 split that we've talked about with these grants. Management cost is outside of that extra money FEMA gives you at 100% federal share to help manage all the paperwork associated with the subgrants. So this is just a call out that there is management costs. It's outlined as an eligible project type in the NOFO, but it is only awarded if you get the project. Then you get an additional 5% to help with your paperwork activities. I'm going to see if I can very quickly drop this link into the chat because I would like you all to have the FEMA website at your fingertips.
I'd also like to add something, Chelsea.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we spoke about the NOFOs coming out on Monday. That's when the actual application period opened. So therefore, if you are seeking to pursue these funding, either FMA or BRIC, the pre-award, if you do decide to request pre-award, that started on Monday. So as soon as application period open, that's when you could start, I guess, tracking your time as you're going for this year's grant programs.
And I'll reiterate, I'll go to the next slide so you can see. If you have any questions about management costs, pre-award, application eligibility, grant programs, if you're curious at all about anything, please call or email us. We are here to connect you. I have said this a bazillion times. I don't know if I've said it on here, but I would rather answer a question in 30 seconds than have you waste 2 hours trying to figure it out where it is in the NOFO. So if we can help connect you to those answers quickly so that you can make that decision whether or not it's worth pursuing more effectively, that's what we're here to do. Any questions, concerns? Does anybody want to go back and look at any of the content that we've reviewed and talk through anything? Okay. Does Hal or Janelle want to add anything here at the end?
Hal, I'd like to pipe in.
Sure.
Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yesterday, I sent out emails to our mitigation stakeholder list, as well as over our listservs to everybody. And I sent 2 separate ones because there were a lot of attachments. I sent one for BRIC and one for FMA separately, so 2 different ones. But there were, besides the NOFO for each of those, there were a lot of additional, well, I'm going to say a lot, meaning like 6 or 7 other additional attachments for different things related to BRIC and to FMA to help you along the way that FEMA put together. So those are additional. So take a look at those because those are to help you in the process. And remember, we have the 2 million. I missed the beginning, so apologies if I repeat something that was already said by Chelsea or Matt. But there is the $2 million state set aside, 1.5 million of which needs to be spent in that capability and capacity building category. So that's a set aside to the state. We want to keep that money in Nevada and use it for all of you that are on here. So keep that in mind if there's something that you would like to apply for, that money for that $2 million set aside stays within, that's as long as your project is eligible, it's gonna be funded eventually. And then of course there's the additional nationally competitive, which can be a little bit harder to do, but we still, are hoping with the help of Chelsea and Matt with Witt O'Brien's that we're going to reduce the number of requests for information from FEMA so that those go through quicker than, and the work that you do now sets you up for more success later so that you're not having to answer a bunch of questions from FEMA along the way after the fact. So that's all, but I just wanted to pipe in about those additional documents that were in those emails, as well as giving an extra push for that, at least the set aside funding for Nevada. Thank you.
Al, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Janelle, for that very informative information, and appreciate everybody for attending today. Really want to thank Chelsea and Matt for this great presentation on the overview of the BRIC and FMA, and hopefully it'll be of great assistance to our jurisdictions and our partners. And look forward, if you're able to, for seeing you at the next session. And everybody, hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.